Hello everybody and welcome back to another video in this Django and React tutorial series. In this video, what we're going to be doing is creating the create room page. So we'll actually be filling out all of the annoying HTML that we need and all of the components to make this look half decent. We'll then be hooking this up to the back end and making it so that the user can actually, press a button, deal with some nice front end UI and form, and then have a room created based on the information they give to the form. So that's about it. I will mention that I'm going to go slightly fast through the actual kind of HTML creation process because that just takes a really long time and it's really annoying to explain every single possible kind of attribute and thing that we can pass to all of these components. I will note right now we are using Material UI for pretty much all of this creation. So if you have a question about something that I'm using or why I did something, you can probably find it online really easily. Just Google Material UI plus whatever the question is that you have or whatever the, component is that I'm using. But to start, we're going to import all of the components that we need to use. So we're going to say import button from, and then we're going to say at Material UI /core/button. There's quite a few here, so I will just type them all out, but let's go import grid from, and then at Material UI /core/grid. We also need typography, so we're going to import typography from, and then at Material UI /core/typography. Next, we're going to import text field. We're going to say import text field from at Material UI /core/text field. We then need form helper text. We're going to say import form helper text from at Material UI /core/ you guessed it, form helper text. And we have to keep going. We're going to import form control from at Material UI /core/form control. And then we're going to import link from React router DOM. This one is different. Make sure you catch that. We've used that before. And then 3 more left. We're going to import radio from at Material UI /core/radio. And 2 more, import radio group from at Material UI /core/radio group. And finally, we are going to import form control label, if you spell label correctly, from at Material UI /core/form control label. Okay, so now we have all of our imports. Those are always annoying to type out, but usually you don't do them all at once like I just did. Either way, now let's actually go ahead and just start creating this web page. The reason for that is we'll just make all of the actual HTML DOM components. I'll kind of show you halfway through, refreshing the web page and all of that. And then we'll hook up all the logic in the back end because it will make more sense to do that once everything is created. Although the first thing I am going to define, and we'll use this in just 1 second, is default votes equals 2. The reason for that is we're going to need a value for the default amount of votes to show on the UI, and it just makes sense to make a variable for that. So now we're going to return from our render a grid, and I'll discuss how the grid works once I finish typing this out. And we're going to say that's a container and spacing equals 1. So a grid is kind of the standard thing used in Material UI to actually align items either horizontally or vertically. If you know anything about CSS, it uses the CSS flexbox. And essentially by default, when we define a grid like this, it's a container and it will hold and align things vertically in a kind of column structure. The spacing says how much space should we put between the items in the grid. 1 means 8 pixels, 2 means 16, 3 means 24. The formula is you multiply this number by 8, and well, that is how many pixels of spacing you're going to have in the grid. So you'll see how it works when we start going through, but that's the basics of the grid. Now, the upper level grid is always a container, and then you have grid items within, which will be aligned based on what kind of properties you give them. So now we're going to make a grid item. So I'm going to say grid item XS equals 12, which I'll describe in a second. And I'm going to say align equals center, and then we end the grid like that. So there we go. We just created our first grid with an item. Now, this item is actually something that will be inside of the contained grid, right, or the grid container. XS equals 12. Essentially, there's a bunch of breakpoints on our grid. So there's extra small, small, medium, large, and extra large. What that defines is the width of the screen. So when we take an HTML window, or take a web browser and you shrink it and make it bigger, notice the elements on the page move around. This is pretty much just telling us what the width of this grid should be when the size of it is extra small. Now, since we're not going to define a small, which we could with, I think, SM, and a large and all these other ones that we could do. This just means that at all points in time, we're going to make this grid item as wide as possible. So if you want it to fill the entire width of the grid, you make this 12. 12 is just the maximum number that you can put for these values. I know this is probably not totally clear for you guys, but just experiment and make this value 6, and you will see the difference versus 12. 6 will make this half of the width of the grid, where we want it to be 12, so it fills the entire thing. This is useful if you're trying to align multiple things on the same kind of row, I guess. You can have, say XS equals 3, and then you can have 4 items that will be perfectly aligned together because they only take up 3 grid spaces, where 12 is the maximum that you can have. So anyways, you'll see that as we go through, but that's the first thing. Next, we're going to make a title. So we're going to say typography. It's not going to be component, I don't think. Actually, sorry, yeah, it is going to be component. Component is going to be equal to h4, and the variant is going to be equal to h4. Typography is just like a nicely styled header, essentially, from Material UI. Then inside of here, we'll simply type our header, which is going to be create a room like so. There we go. That's our first grid item. Let me go to the web browser. I will refresh and show you what it looks like. So I am in my web browser, but what I'm showing you is not the website we just created. Instead, I am talking to you about the sponsor of this video and this series, which is AlgoExpert. Now, as I've mentioned many times, AlgoExpert is the platform that I use to ace my technical coding interviews. At the time of filming this, it has 100 coding interview questions, and you can see I have completed 56 of them, most of them being in the medium and easy category, but some of them in the hard and some in the very hard. AlgoExpert is a great platform to just brush up on your coding skills, or again, prepare for the coding interviews. And if you want to get a discount on the platform, then check it out and use the discount code TechWithTim from the link in the description. So there we go. We have create a room. That is what the typography header looks like that we just created. Notice it's not centered or anything like that. Don't worry about that. I'll show you how we can get that to work in 1 second. So actually, that reminds me, I forgot. Oh no, I did add it here, align center. We do need a line center. I forget if I mentioned that, but this is pretty much just telling us, hey, take all of our grid items and align them in the center. Pretty straightforward. So now we're going to copy this grid item and we're going to make another one so that we'll have something that goes below it. So grid, we're going to leave item XS equals 12 and align center. We're not going to use typography though. What we're going to have here is radio buttons that will allow us to select the control of the playback state for our guests. So whether they can play the music or whether they cannot play it, right? Or so I guess play, pause, or no control. So to start, we're going to say form control. And we're going to say component, and no, it shouldn't be equal to h4. It should be equal to field set like that. And then we're going to close the form control tag. This is where we're actually going to put the form, funny enough. And then we're going to start with some form helper text. So we're going to say form helper text. We will close the form helper text. We'll then make a div. In the div, we're going to say align equals center. And now we're going to put some text, which will be kind of the heading of this section. So I'm going to say guest control of playback state. Let's save that. And now let's just do a quick refresh and see what we're getting. We get create a room and then guest control of playback state. And notice this is like kind of nicely, it's more centered now than it was before essentially. And this is centered within the grid, so is this. All right, so now that we have that, let's make some more things inside of this form control. So that's obviously the header. Now we want the radio buttons. So to make the radio buttons, we're gonna make a radio group. So we're going to say radio group. We're going to say row, meaning we want our radio buttons to be aligned in a row. We're going to say the default value is going to be equal to, and we'll make that equal to true. There we go. We'll close the radio group. And now we're going to define 2 radio buttons inside of this group. So to define a radio button, what we're going to do is we're actually going to say form label control. And the reason we're doing this is because we actually want to have a label for our radio buttons, and by default they don't have a label, so we're using this kind of wrapper almost for our radio button. But anyways, we're going to say form label control, and then we're going to say value equals, and we're going to set the default value or the first value to be equal to true. Now what I'm going to do here is have 2 radio buttons, one with the value of true, one with the value of false. True denoting yes, the users will have control, and false denoting no, they don't have control. Then I'm going to say control, funny enough, is equal to, and this is going to be equal to a radio button tag. So I'm going to say radio color, and color will be equal to primary like that. So let's save that. And this is pretty much saying, okay, we're going to have a form label control. This is actually what the component is that we're going to render, and then we'll have a label either below or some orientation around that. So now we need to define the label. We're going to say label equals, and this will be play/pause. So that's the level of control the guest will have. And then we'll say label, I believe it's placement. Yeah, label placement is going to be equal to bottom like that. All right, so now that we have that, let's simply copy this radio button and paste it below. So now we have another form control. This is going to be a value of false like that. And instead of play/pause, we'll say this is no control. And we can even change the color of our radio button to be the secondary color, not the primary color. Primary is kind of like a nice blue. Secondary is almost like a red. You'll see it when we actually render this. So now let's just refresh the browser. And what is happening here? Form label control is not defined. So I probably just typed it wrong. Form label control, form control label. Oh, well, that would be why. So I guess it is form control label, not form label control. So form control label. I bet some of you guys probably caught that when I was typing it out. And form control label. Okay, so let's refresh now. And there we go. We got our two radio buttons. Notice that we can only select one of them at a time. And those are the two colors. This is primary. This is secondary. Okay, now that we have that, what we're going to add is a text field. And the text field will be where we can actually insert the amount of votes that we need to move on to the next song. So let's copy this header of the grid tag, or the beginning of the grid tag, I guess. Should automatically close it for us. Nice. Now inside of here, we'll add that text field. So we'll start with form control. Then inside of here, we'll create a text field. So we'll say text field like that. And text field is, as it states, just what we can use to type in text. Now I don't need to actually have like a separate closing tag. I can just do it like that. I'm going to say required equals true. So yes, we do need to type something here. We will define an onChange event for this, but we're not going to do that right now. We're going to say type equals, the type of this field is a number field. The default value is going to be equal to this dot votes, our default votes like that. We already defined that above. And then I'm going to pass something else in here, which is kind of unique, but I guess it's good to show. I'm going to say input props, and input props is going to be equal to min : 1. What this pretty much says is that the minimum value for this text field is 1. The reason for that is, again, we don't want votes that are negative, right? Or votes that are 0. We only want to have you want to have a minimum 1 vote to skip. So we put min like that. This is just sending in extra props where I can't just type like min equals 1. That does not work. I need to pass it in the input props. The reason for 2 squiggly brackets here is that this accepts an object. So we need to pass an actual JavaScript object. All right, so now that we have the text field, let's just add some, I guess, like a label for it because we don't have any label. So we'll say form helper text like that. And then inside of here, we'll do a very similar thing we did before. We'll say div. We'll say align equals center. We'll close the div. And then here we'll simply type votes required to skip song. All right, looking good. Let's refresh. And there we go. We get a text field. We have these two things here. We have, our labels, and all looks nice. I do want to align this too, though, in the middle of the text field. So let me show you how we do that. Inside of input props, we're also going to pass a style tag. We're going to say style : that's going to be equal to an object. And then inside of here, I think I can say text align : center. So let's refresh and let's see. And there we go. There it is, nice and centered. So just to remind you, that's what I typed right there. And that aligned the text in the middle. All right, now we have that. We are getting very close to being done, at least for the styling aspect. Let's copy another grid tag. And inside of here, let's create some buttons. So we want a button to actually, submit this form. Then we want a button to go back to the previous page. At least I would like that button. So we're going to use that button that we already imported above. We'll say button. For this one, we'll say create a room. For the color of this button, we'll make this one equal to the secondary color, that kind of nice red. You'll see that in a second. We're going to say the variant of this button is equal to contained. And then we will have an on-click event, but we're not going to implement that quite yet. So now let's just simply copy that whole grid thing that we did, and let's make another one for our back button. So now we will simply say back. And for this one, we can actually implement the logic right now to make this go back to the previous page or go back to the home page. So rather than having the color be secondary, I'm going to make this color be primary. I think that's the color I want at least. Yeah, let's go with primary. And then we'll have variant equals contained. Yep, that's fine. Then we're going to say 2, and this is going to be the URL we want to redirect to when we press this button. So I'll say that's equal to /. And then I'm going to say that the component for this button, and I'll discuss this in a second, is actually, no, come on, give me the autocomplete, component equals, and that's going to be equal to link. That's why we imported link from React router above. Pretty much what this is saying is that this button will act like a link. That's why the component is equal to link, and we will redirect to / if we press this button. So let's have a quick look at our web page and see if we messed anything up. And there we go. We have create a room and back. Now that I'm looking at it, I kind of want to switch the back and create a room color because I just like the create a room to be the other color. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's make that primary, and let's make that secondary like that. Okay, so there we go. Now those are switched up. In my opinion, that looks better. Let's press the back button. Notice it brings us back to the home page. All right, so that is it for actually styling and creating kind of the UI. We will make it look better later, but that's like all I wanted to do for right now. And now we will implement kind of the back-end logic and all of the on-click events and all of that. So there's many different ways in React that we can pretty much press the create room button, grab all of the information from our form, and then send it to the back end. The way that I'm using is pretty conventional. We're going to use React state to keep track of pretty much what is in our form. And then whenever we press that button, we'll look at the current state that we have up here, which we'll define in a second, and we'll send that information to the back end. So to start, I'm going to say this dot state, and we're going to set some default state. So to start, we're going to say guest can pause. That's going to be equal to true. And then we're going to say votes to skip, and that's going to be equal to this dot default votes. All right, so that is our default state. I think I've used state before in this series. I might not have though, so I will kind of explain as we go. Pretty much, we have this state in React. If we ever change this state or update this state, it automatically refreshes and forces the component to update. So what we're going to do is pretty much say, okay, when you change the radio button or you change what's in that text button, we will update the state, and then we will show whatever the state is in that text button, or sorry, in that text field or in that radio button. And then when you press create button, or create room, sorry, I'm misspeaking all over the place here. When you press create room, we will look at the current state and we will send that information to the backend to create the room. So we need a few methods. The first one that I'm going to do is this one is going to be called handle votes change. So I'm going to say handle votes, votes changed, or I guess changed. I don't know what we want to do. Let's go handle votes change. And then this will simply take E, which will actually be the object that called this function. And then inside of here, we're going to say this dot set state. This is the method we use when we want to modify the state in React. Inside of here, we open up these curly braces, and then we simply just type the, key of what we want to update. So here, we'll simply say votes to skip, and that will be equal to this, or sorry, not this, E dot target dot value. Now, in short, what this will do is get the object that called this function, which should be, in our case, the text field. It will then get the value from that text field and just put that here for votes to skip. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Hopefully that makes sense. Now let's have another method, and this one is going to be called handle guest can pause change. So kind of a mouthful, but handle guest can pause change, and we're going to do literally the same thing inside of here. We're going to take E, and we're going to say this dot set state, and inside of here we're going to say guest can pause, and this is actually going to be equal to a little bit of a different one than we just wrote. But we're going to say E dot target dot value equals true, because remember the default values are strings, and then we're going to say question mark. If that is the case, we'll make that true. Otherwise, colon, we'll make that false. So pretty much this is saying, hey, if this value is equal to the string true, then make what is here true, otherwise make it false. So this is just, I actually don't know the official name of this, but it's like an inline if statement in JavaScript. So now that we have these two things, let's hook those up to actually our appropriate things inside of here. So let's go to our radio group, and on radio group, let's go on change, and that's going to be equal to this dot handle, and I believe this should be guest can pause change. I don't need to add the brackets because it will just call that function when an on-change event occurs. An on-change event will just be you press the other radio button, essentially. All right, so we have the on-change there. Now let's go to text field, and let's say on-change is equal to, and you can probably guess what this one is going to be. It's going to be this dot votes handle votes change. So I even typed it wrong, but this dot handle votes change. So whenever we modify this text field, we will update the state. And now what we're going to do, since that should be good, is add actually an event for when we press this create a room button, or add a function, I guess, that we can call. So now another one will say handle room button pressed. In this one, we're actually not going to take E, and I'll show you why in 1 second. And we're going to go here and actually bind this method to the class. Now, you don't have to really know what that means. I will explain it, though. We're going to say this dot handle, or is it, what did I even type here? Yeah, handle room button change. Handle room button clicked, or was it pressed? Pressed. Come on, I can't even remember 2 seconds ago. So handle room button pressed is equal to this dot handle room button pressed, and that's going to be dot bind to this. Now this seems strange, but all this is doing is simply binding this method to the class so that inside of this method we have access to the this keyword. If you don't do this and you have a method that you're calling from inside of your DOM elements here, it won't have access to the this keyword. So if you ever want to have access to this keyword from any of these methods you're using as like event changes, essentially, you need to bind them like that. So anyways, now we have handle room button pressed. It is binded to the class with this, so I'll have access to that from inside. And now we're going to need to call that method from the on click of that button. So let's go here to our button and let's go on click, and that's going to be equal to this dot handle room button clicked. Or why does it keep giving me the clicked? I just assume that that is correct, but no, it should be handle room button pressed. All right, now for now, inside of here, just make sure this is working. We can just console.log this.state, and that should just show us our current state, and then we can see if everything's working fine. So let's go to the browser. Let's refresh. All looks good. Let's go create a room, and then we get guest can pause is true, votes to skip is 2. Let's modify this. And oh, we got something wrong. Cannot read property set state of undefined. Interesting. So what does that mean? Oh, so this is an interesting one. So inside of handle guest pause can change and handle votes change, I'm trying to use the this keyword. Now notice what I just said. We're not going to be able to use the this keyword unless we bind the method to the class. And guess what I didn't do? Bind these two methods to the class. So actually a good error to run into, a rookie mistake. So let's fix this. I'm going to say this dot handle votes change equals this dot handle votes change dot bind this. Okay. And then we'll do the same thing. This dot handle that equals this dot handle guest pause change dot bind to this. Okay, so let's go to the browser now. Let's refresh. All right, let's go to 4, create a room, and notice votes to skip is 4, and the value is true. Now let's go and do this to be 7. Boom, that's true. Let's make that there. There we go, we get false. So our state is updating fine. All seems to be working well. And now what we need to do is just hook this up to the back end. So now let's go inside of handle room button pressed. Instead of console.logging, let's actually send a request to the endpoint we created previously that will allow us to actually create the new room with the information from this form. So this is going to be a little bit of stuff to just follow along with here. We're going to say const request options is equal to, and then inside of here, we're going to say the method is equal to, what is it? Well, it's going to be equal to a post method. We're going to say headers, and that's going to be, first of all, as a string, content, I think I had that spelled right, actually, content hyphen type, and that will be colon and equal to application slash JSON. So this is pretty much just telling us what type of content is coming in. This isn't always required, but in a post request, usually it's a good idea to add it. So we're going to say we're sending application slash JSON content. And then we're going to say the body of our request is going to be equal to JSON dot stringify, like that. And inside of here, we're simply going to put a JavaScript object that will be converted into a JSON string that we can send. So first we'll say votes to skip, and that will be equal to this dot state dot votes to skip. And then we'll say guest can pause, and that's going to be equal to this dot state dot guest can pause. All right, so now that we have that, this will pretty much just take from our state, whatever the value is, and send that. Well, it'll be part of the request option. So we'll send it when we send the actual request. Okay, so hopefully that's all good. Now what we're going to do is first of all, add a semicolon there, and we're going to make a fetch request. So we're going to say fetch, and we're going to fetch this to where? Well, it should be to /API/create room. I believe that's the endpoint I set up. We're also going to pass the request options in this fetch request, and then we're going to set a .then. I'll discuss what this does in a second. We're going to say response, and that's equal to response.json. So pretty much what I just did here is I said, okay, I want to send a request to localhost, right, or whatever this is running on, whatever React is running on, to API/create room. I'm going to send it with the request options, which is going to have the payload, which is my body. It's going to have the type being post and the headers of the content type. And then I'm going to say, okay, once we get a response, that's what this .then is saying. So once we get a response, essentially, let's take that response, let's convert that response into JSON. And then after that, we're going to say, okay, now let's take the data and let's do something with the data. Well, what are we going to do with the data? For now, I'm just going to simply console.log it just so we can see what it looks like. But pretty much we're saying take the response, convert it into a JSON object, and then take the data, which will be this response.json object, and print it out. But you'll see that we'll get all of the things relating to the room in this response, and then, well, we can do something with it, but that's probably going to be in the next video. Anyways, let's have a look here. Let's go ahead and refresh this, and let's just send a create room right now. So we send that, and 500 internal server error. So let's see what the error is here. Let's go have a look at our server. All right, so having a look at this error here, I've just poking around to make sure I wasn't getting too lost on the video. It's saying not null constraint failed, room guest can pause. So pretty much what this is saying is that we didn't get the information that we needed in the request. And so not null constraint is not satisfied because, well, it was null when we tried to create the object. What that means is that we just have to rename these fields right here to actually have underscores. So I'm going to say votes _to _skip. And then I'm going to say guest _can _pause. The reason for this is that these field names need to match what I'm looking for from my server. So here, if I go to views.py, oh, it should be getting, just getting the underscore version. So guest can pause and votes to skip. So I need to make sure that my data is matching that essentially. Before, remember, I had the camel case instead of the snake case. So I just switched it to snake case, and now hopefully this should work. I haven't tested this, but let's give it a shot. Let's refresh. And let's go create a room, and notice that worked. So we actually get a room now. And it says, okay, the code is this, that's the host, and guest can pause is true, votes to skip is 2 ... All right, now let's try to do it again with 4 votes. When we do that, have a look, we actually end up, if I can make this full screen, we get the same code, same host, votes to skip is changed, and guest to pause is what it was before. All right, so that is pretty much it for this video. So that'll show you how to send a post request from the front end. So this is how we're going to communicate with the back end, doing something similar to this. How we actually make kind of a nice looking UI. And in the next video, we'll clean this up a bit. We'll actually talk about what to do next. So now that we have that room created, kind of how we can redirect the user around. And yeah, that will be what we're doing in the next video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. And of course, I will see you again in another video.